Meantime, President Trump taking a tough stance against Iran, imposing new sanctions for what the administration is calling, quote, provocative behavior after Iran recently launched those ballistic missiles. The president is spending the weekend at his Mar-a-Lago resort, and that's where we find David Wright this morning. Hi, David.
Hi, Paula. This is President Trump's first trip since the inauguration down to the place that he's now calling the Winter White House, a phrase that hasn't been heard so much here in Florida, not since the days when President Nixon used to come to Key Biscayne. But because of that judge's ruling in Washington state, it's shaping up to be anything but a relaxing weekend. Hours after President Trump touched down here in Palm Beach, the White House blasted back at the court's authority, noting at the earliest possible time the Department of Justice intends to file an emergency stay of this order and defend the executive order of the president. Earlier in the day, Trump himself tweeted, "We must keep evil out of our country." The White House is now taking particular aim at one of the 7 countries targeted by the travel ban, Iran.
They're not behaving.
Adopting new sanctions targeting Iran's ballistic missile program. That tough talk is drawing praise from House Speaker Paul Ryan.
I think what this administration is doing, which I agree with, is saying we have a new administration and we're going to hold you, Iran, to account.
Others are urging caution. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy called the Trump administration's actions towards Iran reckless. Tehran is pushing back, threatening to kick out U.S. passport holders it deems to be tied to terrorism, noting that the names of the banned American people and entities would be announced later. The Speaker of the Iranian parliament went so far as to call Trump's behavior immature, but the White House signaled the possible sanctions are serious and may even carry a military threat.
Should Americans be ready for the possibility of military action with Iran? Is that on the table?
Look, I've said this before. The president's been very clear. He doesn't take options off the table, but he understands the impact of something like that.
Here at Mar-a-Lago, President Trump is not going to escape the protesters. Demonstrators pro and con plan to descend on this place. Tonight, the American Red Cross is holding its annual White Tie Gala here, and the president plans to attend. Dan, Paula?
David Wright in Palm Beach. David, thank you. Let's talk about all of this, and there's a lot to discuss, with Bill Kristol, editor of the Weekly Standard and an ABC News contributor. Bill, good morning to you. And in Washington, ABC News political analyst Kristen Soltis Anderson. Kristen, good morning. Bill.
Good morning.
Thank you. Let's start here with the big headline this morning. This judge in Washington issuing this temporary blocking of the controversial executive order on immigration. Democrats are excited about this, but it's definitely not over. What happens next?
The judicial system works. You know, President Obama had some of his executive orders challenged. Some were sustained, some were overturned. I think it should reassure people a little bit who think, you know, Donald Trump is going to impose authoritarian rule on America. I mean, I'm a pretty big critic of Donald Trump, but the system seems to be working, right? There are appeals. The judge issues an order. The Justice Department is obeying the order. They're appealing it, which is their right. My main question for you, though, is why are we here and not in Mar-a-Lago? Could you talk to the big shots at ABC? And why is David Wright down there? Could we go?
Maybe Kristen can answer that question.
Can't we do the show from Mar-a-Lago? I mean, it's cold up here in New York.
You're a brilliant television programmer, Bill. Let it not be said otherwise. Kristen, you're a pollster. Is the public on Trump's side on this?
The polling is pretty divided on this question about the immigration ban itself. You have about half of the people in America who think that it's a good idea, about half who think that it's a bad idea. Generally, you find that with anything that Donald Trump does, about 4 out of 10 Americans just really don't like it. They strongly disapprove of him. They want to see him impeached, according to data that I saw this week. But you have the rest of America that either loves him or at least is looking cautiously at this. And I think given that it's just been the first 2 weeks, there are some folks that are nervous. They'll see things like the rollout of this immigration ban, and they'll wonder, is this the strong leadership that we were really looking for? Is this the competent management that Donald Trump said he was going to bring to the White House? But overall, because it's only been 2 weeks, I think there are some folks that are going to give him at least a little bit of leeway to make a few little mistakes here and there, as long as he gets back on track and is managing things effectively going forward.
All right, I don't want to get too wonky here and talk about Dodd-Frank, but the other headline, President Trump signed 2 executive actions which basically chip away at the financial regulations. Is this good for Main Street, or is this good for Wall Street?
You know, I can't judge that. I mean, I think a lot of serious people think Dodd-Frank was implemented, at least in a way that is too broad, that hurts lots of small banks as well as the big banks. this, but who passed Dodd-Frank? Congress, who are Dodd and Frank, right? They're a senator and a congressman. And it reminds you, these executive orders are pursuant to legislative action. Congress gets a say here. And that, I think, is the big story. The first 2 weeks has been full of executive actions, which is fine. He's entitled to try that. But the big question for me is, what does Congress ultimately do in a host of areas, ranging from Obamacare to Dodd-Frank to tax policy? And there, I think, and Kristen knows a lot about this, I think if Trump needs to get his approval ratings up some, to have real clout with Congress. Just having 52 Republican senators, they're not going to just go along automatically when Donald Trump says, I want to do X, Y, or Z.
Sure, and a lot of people are saying, though, that chipping away at these financial regulations is going to be good for small businesses. But, Kristen, I do want to ask you one more thing. What do you make of the feud that's heating up seemingly between Chelsea Clinton and Kellyanne Conway? Of course, Chelsea slammed Kellyanne on Twitter for making up that massacre during an interview. Kellyanne did acknowledge she misspoke, meaning to say terrorists, not massacre. But then Kellyanne added a jab that Hillary Clinton lied about landing during sniper fire in Bosnia. So what do you make of this seeming feud here?
Well, there are a lot of times where Republicans sort of feel like they're treated unfairly, like if somebody on the Democratic side does something, they don't get as criticized for it, where on the Republican side, you keep taking hits for it. Last weekend, you heard some folks from the White House go out and say, look, the wounds are still open here, that even though they've won the White House, they still feel like America is not giving them enough credit, or specifically the media is not giving them enough credit for that win. And so I think that's part of why you saw that response from Kellyanne to what Chelsea Clinton had to say.
Kristen Sultan-Anderson and Bill Kristol, thank you very much for your programming suggestions and analysis this morning. We really appreciate it.
See you next week at Mar-a-Lago.
That's right, baby.
You heard it here first. We'll try to improve that with our executives. Thanks, Bill.